This is Barry Heads with Sharp Counsel. It's a beautiful day. As you know, we're still in our sexual downfall series. It's a four-part series, and right now we're on part three. So we'll call this Sharp Snippet the undisciplined life. The undisciplined life. And in general, the root of all of this is basically a connection with our higher power and how important this is. Um, and when we have this connection and we grow our connection with our higher power over time, it leads to a self-disciplined life. And a self-disciplined life is what we need to grow and prosper and live that, joyous and prosperous life that we all want. Without it, we find ourselves typically, if we can't discipline ourselves in life, we won't discipline ourselves sexually. And that eventually leads to our downfall. So I want to start this sharp snippet off with King Solomon. I talked about him last time, but King Solomon is his story is so profound. He's um, maybe one of the richest, wisest, smartest men in history, and his lack of connection to his higher power, uh, which we call God, his lack of connection with his higher power and the amount of women he was connected with. He had 300 wives and 700 concubines, so that's 1,000 women. He probably had more, and it just shows his lack of self-discipline. Now we can all come up with all the reasons why a king um, during that time would do such a thing for trade, for um, protection, for treaties, et cetera, peace. But it still shows a definite lack of self discipline. King Solomon, with a thousand or more female wives or concubines, the lack of self discipline he shows took away from his focus. It took away from his life. It took away from his energy. I think about the writings of King Solomon and how much wisdom he collected and all the things he did. He could have done probably double or triple or quadruple of what he did. But the focus and the lack of self discipline he had in his sexual life probably, or most likely, I know it did, bled over into his um, life in general. We also see this with a former president of the United States of America. From time to time, you hear talks about President Clinton, how intelligent he was, how brilliant he was, how successful he was, of course. Um, he led a challenging life as a child, and I'm sure as a youth. But his lack of self discipline, a lack of sexual discipline, had some sort of compound interest. His lack of self discipline hurt his legacy. I'm sure it hurt his wife and his children. And here, sitting here today, over 20 years later, people are still talking about this. And I just heard this week that there was a movie coming out about his instance of, or a lack of self discipline when he was in the Oval Office, his sexual promiscuity. When we do this, when we don't take time to release the vices we have in terms of sexual discipline, when we don't take time to release those things, it affects our families, it affects our job, it affects our health. In terms of our family, we lose trust. And trust is such a big thing, whether we're talking about an organization, here we're talking about the family system. It's such a big deal. It affects our job. People's People don't respect us, basically. Respect dwindles. I don't know why, but it's just part of the human psyche. With the lack of self-discipline in terms of the sexual realm, you're liable to do almost anything. And in addition, it affects our health. We all know that diseases are out there. I just read an article probably 2 or 3 days ago and talked about um, STIs or STDs are at an all-time high in America. Even through the coronavirus, STDs are at an all-time high. It affects our health. Let me give you an example. Have you ever seen undisciplined children in the store? when they're of age and they're still undisciplined, it's quite frightening. There's no more excuses. Those undisciplined children become undisciplined teenagers and undisciplined adults who sometimes find themselves in jail. So we take these things lightly in terms of self-discipline when we shouldn't, because with compound interest, it's just leading further and further and further into a life that nobody wants, a life filled with chaos and hurt and pain and negativity and financial loss and loss of trust and eventually death. So discipline yourself. If you don't, if you don't, it'll cost you. This Barry Heads with Sharp Counsel. Have a great day.